Hello, welcome everyone to the Idea Cafe. My name is Maylin Plummer and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm co-chair of the Idea Committee along with Adriana Quinones, and I will be your host for today's conversation. I'm also coming to you live from the amazing Desert Botanical Gardens in Phoenix, Arizona, where they have graciously allowed me to host this conversation from one of their lovely conference rooms. So thank you very much, Desert Botanical Gardens, for having me, and thank you so much to committee member Kavina Devereaux for making this happen. On behalf of our committee members, we want to thank you for being here and showing up. I would also like to acknowledge the association and its board members and the Idea Committee for your ongoing commitment and support for this work and this opportunity to be with you all today to keep these important conversations going. And most importantly, I want to welcome our distinguished panelists, Dr. Jandel Allen-Davis and Dr. Thomas Easley. It is my deep and greatest honor and privilege to be here with you today. And I can't wait to bust this topic wide open with the two of you. And I think it's going to be so interesting and eye-opening for so many people. So for those who have never joined the Idea Cafe before, it began a few conferences ago with the hope of elevating voices and lived experiences to promote conversations and greater awareness of idea-related principles and topics. So our hope is to encourage gardens to lean in and do the work to create cultures of learning, awareness, and action of what it means to be inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible. To change how we think, learn, and share, and behave often begins with a conversation. So here we are. We are here today to talk about token representation and how we can shift towards creating cultures of allyship. The thing is that representation matters, and we should not stop trying to diversify staff, leadership, volunteers, and visitors to better represent the communities we serve and elevate the voices of the underserved. But the work does not end when the representation arrives. That's when it actually truly begins. As well-intentioned as many organizations and institutions are in wanting to increase representation of who we perceive as missing or underserved, and bringing in a fresh new face of change or a voice of change, the reality is that that person or those people begin their journey as separate, as different. And the burden of belonging and integrating themselves is often on them. Speaking from my own personal experience as a former staff member in different organizations, it's lonely and adds a layer of burden to the already heavy expectations of the change I'm supposed to bring on top of doing my job. I've questioned my choices, my abilities, my right to be in the role, and most often I've compromised my sense of worth. And all I want to be is me and empowered to just do my best work and be joyful in it. So I want to emphasize that this conversation is not focused only those within an organization. I want you to take a moment and broaden your lens and think about visitors, partners, programs, events, every part of your garden and who you interact with. We all have a part in cultivating cultures of equity that celebrate and values what makes each of us distinctive and unique and creates an environment where each of us are able to thrive. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to introduce our two panelists today. What we will do is we'll begin with some questions, but we have built in plenty of time for Q&A. So please feel free to post questions into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. So joining us here today we have Dr. Jandel Allen-Davis. She's the president and CEO of Craig Hospital in Denver, Colorado, a world-renowned rehabilitation hospital that exclusively specializes in the neurorehabilitation and and research of patients with spinal cord and traumatic brain injuries. Dr. Allen-Davis is board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and was in active practice for 25 years. She's a graduate of Dartmouth College and Dartmouth Medical School, and she completed her residency at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia. Following her extensive training, she spent 4 years in the Indian Health Service in Tuba City, Arizona, prior to moving to Colorado. Dr. Allen-Davis is an active participant in the community and currently serves on the boards of Dartmouth Geisel Medical School, Denver Botanical Gardens, the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, National Jewish Health, Colorado Thrives, the Colorado Hospital Association, the Denver branch of the Federal Reserve, and serves as a commissioner on the Colorado State Economic Development Commission. Dr. Jandel Allen-Davis, I'm not sure when you sleep, but I am absolutely in awe of your commitment. And I think that this is just so excellent. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Next, we have also with us Dr. Thomas Rashad Easley. He's the child of civil rights activists that protested in the Children's March in 1963 at the height of the civil rights movement. And they integrated an all-white school in Toledo, Ohio. He's the Assistant Dean of Community and Inclusion at the School of Environment at Yale University, which is the first school of forestry back in 1900. Dr. Easley has attended Alabama A&M University for his bachelor's in science, Iowa State University for his master's, and North Carolina State University for his doctorate in education. He has backgrounds in forestry, the genetics, and adult education. Dr. Easley is certified in diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting, and he works with academic institutions, corporate entities, and other organizations to help them actualize a strong diversity initiative that welcomes everyone and shifts work culture to be equitable. Dr. Easley is also a musical artist, professor, Eagle Scout, and a former campus pastor. He intentionally merges conscious lyrics, ecumenical spirituality, land stewardship, education, diversity, equity, inclusion principles, and entrepreneurial thinking in his lectures, workshops, and presentations. And to add to that, he's recently started a consulting company for diversity, equity, and inclusion called Mind Heart for Diversity. Welcome, Thomas. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get in on it. So this conversation, I kind of broke it up into kind of two parts just to let our listeners and our participants kind of understand where we're looking at. And on one side, we're really talking about token representation and kind of identifying it, what that means, and just some of the things that we've observed and of course your experiences. And then the other part is really the cultural change and shifts. And we talk about things like allyship. So we'll want to kind of talk about a little bit more about, well, what does that actually mean? So in today's climate of social awareness and this urgency to change and to be more equitable, what troubles you most about what you have observed and witnessed? And I'll let either one of you speak up and go first.
Go for it, Thomas.
Okay, I was about to defer to you. Okay.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Okay, all right. Okay, in today's climate of social awareness and urgency for change towards equity, what troubles me the most about what I've observed or witnessed? I'm gonna be honest, I think many people probably are excited because so many organizations are getting really engaged in this work, and I'm happy about that. But I'm also troubled by it, because all the organizations are late. It's not a date. They say better late than never. Right? No, they're late, and because the fact that they want to address this now and so deeply now, that's one of my ultimate concerns, is that people are, really trying to do this now. And then the other concern I have, I'll be honest, is I feel like there's this phenomena of groupthink. It seems like there's so many organizations, like they're all doing the same thing. Everybody wants to get a VP. Everyone wants to get a VC. Everyone wants to get a diversity director. Everyone wants to get this. And I think that at my age now, observing that, I also find that, problematic because going to how you introduced us and introduced this, when you say, when you come into the organization, that's when the work begins. And I just want to encourage everyone who's listening is to see what's happening with all of these organizations is that they're all doing the same thing, which means that even when we get to those organizations, we still got to deal with the same crap. You see, because they're all basically doing the same thing. And it's probably because the organizations were all founded in similar ways. So that's what bothers me.
So a few things hit me. The first, and probably the most troubling, is the forces that are working against change, whether they're doing it subtly or right there on the open stage. And I won't go totally political, but whether it's attempts to change what voting rights look like in states, any one of a number of issues that way. At the same time, there's this clash that's coming there. So that I'd say is maybe the 50,000 or maybe the ground level, but coming a little bit further down the 50,000 foot view, my sense of things is there has been great excitement and interest positively from CEOs, so coming from C-suites and from business, which has been slow to really jump into this the way it needs to be jumped into. And on that point in particular, we are doing it the same way and expecting different results. And that's really troubling to me. And you talked about it, Thomas, when you mentioned, everybody's trying to hire the DEI person and that sort of thing, which then gets to the third thing that's troubling to me about things is I think we're moving, we're moving really quickly. I think that is both, boy, there's an opportunity, let's go for it. But there needs to be a slowing down and a turning inward to the organization to actually look at your own cultures, to have a sense of how inclusive are you truly in terms of your policies, your practices, your thoughts, your actions, not just what you look like and who gets to sit at tables, but do you even stop long enough to say, what am I not thinking about on any one of a number of topics, let alone this one? Because otherwise we're going to get what we always get, which is some change. There's a sense it's not happening quickly enough. And then we'll just sort of, I think, go back into some of our old practices, as opposed to saying, let's start really and getting a real sense of our own institutional and organizational readiness for this kind of change. So those are the things that trouble me about it, in the context of a lot of excitement that's out there. In fact, I'll just say one other thing. It's interesting to me that even some of the sorts of, whether it's groups or roundtables that have popped up in order to begin to address this work, even in here in Colorado, I look around the room and I think, well, first of all, I'm the usual suspect again. And, but more importantly, there's almost this sense of we're at the table, so we're fine. So I want to know what's the internal work that those of us, all of us, including myself, who have chosen to take this on. What's our internal personal work that we have to do as well? So it's a lot harder than we think, and it's not going to be fast if we want to do it right.
Thank you. And so talking about, this rush for change and the enthusiasm, and we kind of talk about that in a sense, there's always going to be a little bit of that tension with what do we pivot and change immediately, what we push forward, and then what do we take slow. And I think that all of it has a lot to do with just this inertia of how things have always been done. And boy, I feel like that there's so much to take that in, right? And I think there's different ways to be able, that organizations need to look inwardly on what are those kind of mechanisms or what all those factors might be that's kind of creating that inertia, right? Or the questions that they need to ask so that they can then either certain things have to be like, nope, we just can't do this anymore. And we're going to make that change versus certain things that obviously it's so internal to all of us, the implicit bias and how we look at things, and taking time to really educate and listen. And I think that it basically creates situations where you just don't, I think you're not always aware. So I guess, what are all the red flags, right, as an organization or for those who are the face of change? What is it that we should be aware of, or what should we look for?
Well, so when you say red flags, I could go a couple of directions. So, and I want to make sure I'm clear on the question. Is it, what are those things that tell you that you're about to do the same things and expect different results? Is that kind of?
Yeah, that as well as like, okay, we're doing this right, or we're
right. Or what are the things that tell you that you are?
Yeah.
You know,
Guys.
let me start on the positive, because on that side of that, we are doing this right. The first is, I think, a really deep, I'm not talking a 10-minute, a 15-minute, but a deep conversation with your organization, in this case, our wonderful public gardens, about what do you think will change as a result of even stepping into this work in a different way, in a meaningful, substantive, sustained way. Why is it important, and what will change? What are you afraid of in terms of even taking the step? And I'll tell you, one of the things that people, when you really start to peel that onion, what they're afraid of is doing it incorrectly. And some of what we need to have both the confidence and a little bit of the assurance and reassurance is that if we knew how to do it correctly, we'd have done it. So don't let that be a barrier to change. I think the other is to look at that mission that's probably emblazoned on the wall somewhere, or and to say, how is our lack of inclusivity or diversity, or even thinking through the lens of equity, how is that not serving, or how is that serving our mission? And really, and those three questions aren't ones that you can answer in an hour meeting. They're ones that I think people need to have the opportunity to reflect and ponder individually, and then come together. And then to say, so if you're doing those things, we'll say, check, 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 you're on your way. And then the last one is, when you come together to actually have a deeper conversation about this, when you come out of that space, room, I don't know, Zoom, as we're living on all these days, you have the ability then to say, okay, what are we doing that's different from any past attempts that we've had, or what we think we were gonna, how is what we are planning to do now different than what we thought before? And then finally, I'd say, I don't know that those conversations necessarily, I hope I don't get like exited from the Zoom right now, but I don't know that they necessarily need to be facilitated by somebody with expertise in equity, inclusion, and diversity. I think this is work that certainly leaders need to take on, because it's not any different than, if you really think about it, and I don't mean to belittle it, and I also understand the severity and enormity of the challenge. It's no different than saying, we're going to take on a new master development plan, or we're going to take on a master sort of plan around how we want to do some programming changes. You know, when you think about why it's this whole question of asking and answering the question of your why behind the work. Does it tie to mission? How is it different than things we've done before? What's it going to look like on the other side that's different than what we've done heretofore? Yeah.
I want to start with the point of you don't need a diversity, person or an expert to help you, because I actually agree. That's why the way that I do work is I don't like people to be dependent on me. I like to help them not to need me. But that also comes from being a minister. Now let me talk as a minister. I think a minister lens, you see the opportunity and you see the headache at the same time. So I see red flags as opportunities. So the first red flag is when you hire one person. That's the first one. The second red flag is the hiring practices, how they even did the whole process. One of the reasons I think I make a lot of times people nervous when I talk is because I kind of like to go to the root. I see, for me, sometimes I think one of my, I may call it a curse, some call it a gift. I kind of feel I see the gray areas every time I go into an organization. I'm like, oh, I see all the inequitable spots. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. If you're hiring and you're secretive, there's a problem. If you're paying people and it's not public and it could cause a rift, there's a problem. So to me, the whole secretiveness, I think I just made up a word, but the secrecy that organizations do, to me, is also anti-DEI at the same time. And then you get to wanting to bring someone in like me, you know, and then, oh, I'm supposed to come in one person in a whole in a whole organization. And you have departments in an organization. But then, you know, diversity is always seen like the one person. So then here's the other red flag. The other red flag is the ironic way that we're seen and in the way that we're treated. Because the truth is, if you bring one person in, you must be saying that person must be smarter than everybody there. Then when the person comes in and then they start demonstrating the behavior, everybody goes, oh, and I'm like, well, you wouldn't have brought me here if I didn't know what I knew and if I wasn't here to do this. So that's why I say, like, the way that we do things, I see the red flags, which is then when I see the way that we do things, I'm like, okay, we can do something about that. Instead of bringing one person in, let's bring in two, or let's try to build a unit. You know, like, let's actually think about what we want before we bring them in. Two, you know, if we say that we want to be diverse, I think what everybody really is saying is we want to be fair. So then look at everything that you're doing that's lacking fairness. Even the hierarchy, the people who get to make decisions, the people who get to do certain things and who don't. And you see it in academia. It's one of the weirdest things, and it's hard for people to, like, once you put it in people's faces, it's hard for them to deal with it when you look at who has job protection and who doesn't. I'm like, just stop right there. You can just stop right there. But we want to do everything else. Oh, we need to bring more students of color. We need more faculty of color. I'm like, no, just look at how you operate.
Yes.
And if people would do that, you'll see your own red flags. And that's why I agree with Dr. Jandel when she said you don't need a diversity director, because you don't. The only thing the diversity director or diversity person helps you do is look at the things that you don't want to look at. Mm-hmm. That's all that we do. We help you look at the things that you don't want to look at. I almost feel like we help you address the things that you don't actually want to change. And then that's why we become the headache when we're there. So those are the red flags that I look for. And being that I've been the inaugural in every job that I had, you know, that's why my hair won't grow back. That's why I can talk about it like that, because I'm always the one who walks in and I'm like, okay, you told me you wanted to do this. Now I'm trying to do it, and now you're the reason why we're not doing it. See? So yeah.
You know, the other thing I'd add as a red flag is if the very first thing you do is start thinking about metrics and measurement. If you start right away saying we need 6 from column A and 3 from column B, and you know, we need to do this and do that, and you start down that path, that's another one where you haven't slowed down long enough to really think through the fact that it's not going to be sustained. I think one of the most heartbreaking things an organization can do is say we will have arrived when X% of our leadership teams, whether it's at the C-suite or the middle management, looks a certain way, without a sense of how welcoming, how multicultural in terms of how we think about things is the organization. Because what almost invariably happens is those people get marginalized. We get marginalized in some way. Whether we're talking race, ethnicity, ability, you name it, you get marginalized because you haven't done the hard work of saying, is this a place that actually is, you know, has the mindset or a worldview that is mindful of the fact that we are all different and we all bring strengths and gifts to the work, and I welcome it, I want it, as opposed to I gotta do it kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's so excellent. And I think that to your point, when you talked about, or you mentioned metrics, right? Because I think that this is exactly as good intentioned as so many things are. I think that there is a business mind to it in some sense, but that we forget that we're dealing with human beings. And I think that bringing the humanity into this process is what I'm hearing, right? And
yeah,
so
and it's not,
we're not a transaction.
Right. It's not to say that there isn't a time and a place and a space for that, but it certainly isn't, you know, back to how do you know you're on the right track? It's because you have not, I remember, just real quickly, I think we talked about this time last year, as painful a time every time, you know, I'm on PTO this week, but here I am working. And I was out back doing some work and reflecting on where we all were. I was actually out planting annuals and thinking about the work where we were this time last year, and my teams and folks that I get to work with saying, we need to put something out. We have to say something. We have to. And I said, no, we don't. I said, we're not doing any of that, because all they're going to do is they could come over to Craig Hospital tomorrow and look and say, well, you said all that, but this place doesn't necessarily reflect that sort of a mindset. I said, we're going to slow down. We're going to spend time talking about this. We're going to spend time actually doing some of the own reflecting that we all need to do, both collectively and individually. And don't worry, we'll have a strategy. I know I figured out right away what the 5 pillars that we needed to work on within the organization, but was even slow to bring that up because I didn't want to turn this into, this sort of, whether you call it transactional or maybe we call it curricular activity that you're going to do, actually extracurricular activity that you're going to do. That was cynical. Sorry about that. That you're going to do. So,
We're all allowed there sometimes.
yeah.
So I think, you both alluded to some of this, but just to kind of call it out. So what should BIPOC leaders and non-BIPOC leaders be asking ourselves before we commit to a job or a board so that we don't become a token hire? And then and a lot of times that's the thing, right? We don't always recognize when it happens. Sometimes it's really obvious, but other times are not really, we don't know. And so if that happens, well, then what next?
Okay. Well, now I may have a different position about this because I mentioned it. We had our talk a couple of weeks ago. The whole term token, the truth is it doesn't necessarily bother me at first, because if I'm working in an open, equitable environment, well, I don't really know what that looks like yet, but I'm just saying ideally, if I'm there, to me, everyone is a token until, and this is what I mean. If you have a job and you're saying that you need representation, and I'm not just talking about race, I'm just saying the skill set, then he, she, or they, when they get hired, they have to come in and then there's something that got them in the door. And then I think they have to do something that keeps them in the building, So I think that, so for me, when I walk into a place, being a token doesn't bother me because I'm like, I know I have to get there and I have to work on things. It's what happens after I get there and I'm there for a minute and then they keep trying to do the same thing. Okay, now you're treating me like a token. And I'm not special or different, but I also don't play that, so like I know how to speak up for myself. I know how to assert without being a jerk. And I'm a rapper, that's why I can make it rhyme like that. So I know how to do that. I know how to say, no, I think we should do this. No, let's do that, but I also do things like ask questions like, are you sure that's where you want to go? So I really try to bring them into it. Now, you said, what if I'm talking to people, Black and Indigenous and other people of color? I always encourage them, do as much as you can about getting the history of the organization before you go in. Matter of fact, if they're bringing you in like how people bring me in to do this work, that's why I always ask the question, what led to this? I always start with that. What led to you either wanting a consultant or wanting me to come in and help you, or you in particular saying, I want to hire a person of color? What led to it? And I'm still just looking for answers besides George Floyd. I'm still looking for answers besides what happened in 2020. Like I'm still waiting on that, because besides that, what's your real reason? And so then here's the thing, then I tell people, so then if the reason that people are doing this is in response to something national, that's why I said I have a problem with group thinking, then right there's another red flag of how the token behavior is about to happen. Because what these organizations are also revealing is that they can't think on their own. And so everybody's doing what everybody else is doing. That's why I appreciate Jandel. She's no, you're not gonna do a statement. We're gonna have a conversation. It's like, because but anyway, I'll just pause there and just see if that's answering, the question.
Well, I would agree that I don't find the concept of token, being a token, first of all, I don't find it foreign because it's been the case for my 40 plus years as a grown-up, I suppose, way past that, that I find myself often the only one. I think the challenge, and I do mean it as both the challenge and the opportunity, if you really want to deal with tokenism, now back to something that may sound exactly opposite what I've said heretofore, is that we need to start thinking about how do you widen the aperture to consider talent and skills and passions and competencies differently than the way we do now. And so that we're not the only one in organizations. And that's work that has to start. And when I think about pipeline work, that starts in grade school, right? Because we've got some serious pipeline issues in general, let alone that are fueled by sexism and racism and you name it, abilityism, all the ways that we view difference, but are also viewed by just some real, I think, challenges in our education system in general today that we've got to that we've got to face that have that are pervasive. So what I do know, though, in terms of then how it plays out in organizations, much like I think, Thomas, you're saying, is that we pretty quickly get pigeonholed and relegated to doing specific things. I can remember this many, gosh, the things that come to mind and when they come to mind, but sitting in this goes back a million years ago when I was still very much in practice, clinical practice, pretty much that's all I was doing, sitting in one of our weekly department meetings with 40 odd, 50 odd OB-GYNs, nurse practitioners and physicians, and the perinatologist, who's a high-risk doctor, up talking about a particular case. And the person that he was talking about was of African descent. And he said, blah, 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 and then quoted some study. He turned to me and he went, right, Jandel? And the whole room looked at him like, I looked at him like, what? And everybody like, what the hell? Excuse my English, what are you doing? I just went, that was strange. But so, I mean, and that is like such an obvious sort of thing where somehow or other, because of how I look, I'm supposed to be expert at all that has to do with certainly African Americans or Africans. So, I mean, so it's those little kinds of things, or even as a woman, I will say, having the job I had at Kaiser Permanente before I got this role, being viewed as, well, and I was a physician, I was a doc, I practiced for 25 years. And then ended up in this executive role, doing government relations and community benefit, community relations and stuff, and yet could absolutely understand finance and operations and some of those other things, but was never actually viewed as a whole person who could do all that. And I used to, in some of my more, I don't know if you call it wound licking or cynical or just feeling hemmed in, feeling pigeonholed, say, I'm the girl who gets the coffee. You know, that's how they looked at me. I'm the girl who gets the coffee. That's, you know, they gave me all the women's. You think I can't do finance? You think I can't understand how this goes? So I think that's the other way that tokenism plays out. You come in and you're viewed in some sort of stereotypical roles. And when opportunities come up to do other things, we're not considered, because that's not what you didn't come in through that door. You're not in that line for that particular promotion or that particular opportunity. When it comes time to think about, you know, furthering education or advancement, development, that sort of thing, they may not think about us that way. And so that's the other way this plays out, which is why I think one of the most vital things to breaking this down is sponsorship. I mean, you can give me mentors, I get it. I can be a mentor, I can be a coach, I can do all those sorts of things. But what I really need, candidly, and I will be very candid and blunt about this, and it's only, and it is in no small part why I'm even where I am today, is you need sponsors. You need an old white guy who says, she's with me. And I hope you hear that in the way that, you know, it's not a disparaging term, but we've got to be, and I am dispassionate about this because I think it's values neutral. Power is, and we know where the power lies. So if organizations are really interested in changing this, the person who is in the best role, and now that would be I in my little hospital, to make those changes is the person who sits in the C-suite. And if you want to know what's important to them vis-a-vis this topic, I'm going to sound like the old fart I am. Show me their day planner and show me their checkbook, because how they spend their money and how they spend their time will be the real tells the real story of what's important. And how they view this particular issue now, back to being the only one, and hopefully not the only one over time. Yeah.
You made me think of, oh, go ahead.
No, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, you just made me think about something with how you show up at work. This idea of one of the things that I tell people is, you know, to, like you said, understand the culture, and then also, you know history and know history of yourself, you know, because what can also happen is we'll get there and then we'll want to do what we see everybody else doing. And the thing is, I don't think that that's wrong. I just think that that's also how we get in trouble many times. You know, oh, I see he gets to sign off on this decision. Okay, well, I want to sign off on it too. And then the mistake is that, well, we may not know how he, she, or they got there. Right. You know, so we want that. So I often tell people too, you know, that, you know, you have to be mindful. And I'm not saying of your place. No, I don't mean it like that, because we're all humans. No, but be mindful of your position. and be mindful of how they brought you in, because sometimes you'll come in and it's like, well, how come I can't do that? And it'll be because of identity. It'll be because of your role. It'll be because of your job. Now, I'm not saying that I'm relegating you to that, but I'm saying that you have to be mindful of that and understand the organization. I'll say this one last thing, because when you got on, Doc, I was getting ready to say, I went to an institution that built character. So I went to an HBCU. And I have a friend who's working at an HBCU, but is a Harvard grad. And I had to remind her, I was like, don't put the Harvard expectations on the HBCU. Do not minimize the HBCU, because many institutions operate based on the resources that they have and how they've gotten to where they are. And then I said, but also don't be, but don't act like you don't see what you see. And I went to an institution that, the reason I said built character, because I was nurtured, I was cared for, and I knew that I was Black in a privileged, positive way. Like, I embrace being Black. I'm not one who turns my head. No, I know it. I also know that I'm indigenous too. But the challenge comes when I'm like, I also had to learn, okay, if I needed to make sure my scholarship money went through, I had to be at financial aid a couple of days early. I would be there all of the time. I had to make sure that my paperwork went through. Because my parents didn't go through this, I had to do it. Well, a number of people will probably deal with that and just let it tear them apart and fall apart. I'm thankful that I at least looked at it and I let it build me up. So then when I got to other places of work, I basically work around everybody. That's why I say it build character, because I get to many places and it's like, Thomas, wow, you're doing all of this. Aren't you using the committee? I asked the committee to help me, but they have a lot of other things doing. So I'm working. So then I get known as doing the committee work. I get to do the teamwork. And then I get to do all of that. And I'm not, that's not a bragging thing, because it shouldn't be like that. But I just want to say that I also tell people who come in and ask the token, make sure that you do the job really well, because they're looking at you unlike they look at themselves. They need you to be perfect, even though they're imperfect. So I say, make sure that you do the job well. Make sure you know what's on that paper. I'm not saying be scared. No. Do the job well, because that evidence of doing the job well, for me, weighs more than the philosophy and the idea. I can at least show you what I've done. So we wanted to add that.
So that brings, I think, this whole then concept, right, is then leadership or people in the C-suite, as you referred to at Jandel, right, that are either setting the example or sponsoring those individuals. I want to dive a little bit deeper into what they can do to best support new colleagues with different thoughts or different representation, whatever that may be. How can they better support them and create an environment? What are the steps that can be taken?
Yeah, some of the coolest, now this is one of the ways in which I think we're doing things differently. Things that I've been watching happen is how have had the chance to sit in on a few sessions and some work we're doing here in Colorado called the Colorado Inclusive Economy on hiring differently. So let's start there and stop the hiring based on what a resume looks like. Get very clear about what the role is, and therefore what are the strengths, the talents, the skills that you need, and then go out and look for the person with those. So I think that is one thing that we are beginning to explore. A number of companies, and we are talking about it. As I said, we're taking our time on all of this stuff because, I mean, it's work and you have to learn how to do it. So I think that's one for sure that is important. The other, and this really is where I think having a more inclusive, it requires a wider, bigger, it's not a view of the world, a world view, is to be always thinking about, based on what's needed, who could do the work or who might benefit from sitting at that table and having the chance to grow and feel uncomfortable and feel a little stretched, but feel supported at the same time. And so I think through those sorts of lenses, we have a great opportunity to change things as well, from my perspective, my sort of vantage, I suppose. Though there are some simple things at the same time that we ought to be doing. I mean, there's some basics that we also ought to be making sure we're doing. Signage should be at least Spanish and English, at least, but all signage, wayfinding, as I think about public gardens and the work you all do. But even in my hospital with wayfinding and materials, there were back early in COVID, we started using Zoom as a way to keep our 1,000+ employees up to date on what was going on. And, you know, it took me a couple months before, embarrassingly, I went, hold on, since when was separate ever equal? We have Spanish speaking only employees in the hospital who you get on this thing and you talk and they can't understand and they probably aren't getting on. And so let's add interpreter services to our weekly Zooms, or now they're bi-weekly Zooms. And let's also, though, talk with the folks who are there, the managers of those folks, and say, you've got to make time because I want them on this call, because if they're not, they're going to hear the information maybe secondhand, if at all. And so I think it's that notion of how do you actually think through a more inclusive lens. I also think it's super important, and I think some leaders are maybe more akin to this way of leading than others, is that whole leadership by walking around, but not just walking around, but truly seeing the people that you serve and making sure they see you. And so, and that's not just those people who are your direct reports, but in our hospital, you know, the food services, environmental services, people know I adore them, even though they made my cheeks a little fatter this year in the food service. But they know, we would not have gotten through this last year the way we had, were it not for every single person there aligned to mission. And so, you know, making sure that we create spaces for everybody to have a voice is another really important thing to do. So that whole leadership accessibility and not having to be the main event, as it were, of things, and give people shots, but just don't throw them in and say, okay, I'm gonna put you over here and call it window dressing. You got to be there to be supportive of them too, but also back to she's with me or he's with me. Tell the people who are organizing the group that she or he is with me, and I really want to give them the opportunity to grow and learn. And let's see where it goes. But surrounding yourself by the right people, you can get those things done. But more importantly, back to something also you said, Thomas, is when you are given those opportunities to sit at those tables, sometimes you're there. I have absorbed so much over the years just by being a keen listener, observer, and then using those trusted sources to bounce crazy off of or ask questions about, but also just going out and being a lifelong learner and learning myself. So I think that this is not just about here, this is yours. And as you said, that's when the work begins, whoever you may be. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm trying to be concise like that. All right.
I wasn't very concise, I'm sorry.
Well, to me, you were, you know, because I'm with you. You helped me with my thoughts. So I appreciate the way that you broke it down. Because when you said be clear about the role, you know, I was going to say, then make sure that we make it about the skills that's needed. You know, don't just bring in someone that you like because they think like you. Now, here's a little one of my philosophies: a person who weighed 300 and over 7 pounds and now weighs under 180. Challenges help you grow. Comfort keeps you stagnant. So if you really want to grow, then don't just look for the easy thing. That's why a lot of organizations, I notice that that's what they do. Let's bring in someone who thinks like me. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to bring in someone who's slinging fire everywhere either. I need the building to stay up. I need the walls to stay solid. But I also don't want I don't want a yes person. The next thing is, when we're having these meetings, you know, think about what voices are not there, but then think about why those voices are not there. And then don't just think, oh, how can we get the voices here? Then start thinking, well, what happens if we got the voices here? Especially when thinking about gardening. My question for you in this community is, how many ways of gardening do you actually know? How many ways of tending the gardens and people do you actually practice? And how many of those ways are founded from outside of this country? 9 times out of 10, if it's not founded from outside of this country, it might not actually be efficient. I'm just gonna start right there. I'm just being real with you. Because everybody that I know who does this very well, who really comes in, they bring in their culture from South America, from Africa, from Asia, from Europe. They bring that in, you know, South America, and then, oh, well, you know, that's great. So I just want to give you that. Think about how inclusivity will actually impact you if you're the leader who says, we need this. See, I've had the experience, Jandel, that they don't really think about how it's going to impact them. They just think about, oh, yeah, let's just bring in this diversity. And they bring someone like me, and I'm like, ooh, look how people are promoted in the hierarchy. Then when I like, well, we might need to talk about that. Okay, now they hate me. I'm like, I wish you would have thought of that before I came. I thought you knew your organization. Okay, here's the other thing. Did you move up in the organization? Now, this is me talking to the leaders who want to do this thing. Okay, then if you moved up in the organization, don't kid yourself that other people may come in and may not want to do it. Do not do that. Because see, that's what happens, right? You move up, someone else comes in like me. And I love sitting at the executive table, but I've been told you should be happy that you're sitting at the executive table. I'm like, literally, I've been told that, like, you should be happy that you're sitting there. And I'm like, okay, all right, and then I'm like, all right, cool. So I just encourage people, don't worry, Doc, that person never said that again, especially to a Black person. She learned the hard way. So I just want you to, so for real. So then that's what I want you to think about. The last thing I say is think about your idea or your philosophy or your understanding of what the best actually means. We're hiring the best. Everybody can't get the same best. It's the most ignorant statement that I hear. And I hear a lot of when we say we're going for the best. And the reason I say that, because I'm like, well, then how can everybody do the same thing? And I'll say this about education, then I'll leave it alone, because I work at Yale and Doc went to Dartmouth. If every place is trying to be the Ivy League, then diversity is never going to work. So when you think about how come people can't get into certain schools, they can't get into certain things, and people seem to try to ignore, like, having access to certain networks changes lives. So then if everybody is doing the same thing or trying to go to the same way, then diversity is not going to work. If every HBCU is trying to do what the Ivies do, if every land grant is trying to do what the Ivies do, if everyone's trying to do it, then you get to the Ivy and you realize, the Ivy's not what you thought. Then that means, why are we trying to be each other? It seems like we need to figure out who we actually are. So I just want to, say that. And the way I'm saying that about the universities and stuff, I'm saying that about the gardens. The same way to the gardens, right? California's doing this, but Colorado is doing this. I'm not a fan of groupthink. I like data informed, not data driven. That informs me, but I have way other points that actually teach me and actually give me information. So I just wanted to say that.
No, that's fantastic. And I think that it is exactly kind of, as you said, Thomas, because the garden world is no exception. And I think a lot of times what our trappings are when we are trying to be a world-class garden, what does that mean? And is that what everybody needs to be? Is that how you're going to best serve your community? What does that mean? And that's it. It's that reaching to be the Ivy League of gardens or the biggest and the best and what that means. And so I think that sometimes that we get lost in that a little bit. So, but I want to make sure, because we're getting some really great questions in, but I want to get a little bit to culture change and shift and this concept of allyship before I jump into these questions. So what does that mean to you, allyship? And I mean, I think that means, like, well, what does meaningful change and support look like? And we keep calling that allyship, right? But what is, I guess that's a two-part. What does meaningful support and change look like to you?
Yeah, maybe I'll tell a story and I'll put it right in, lay it right at the feet of gardens. In 20-some year, we have to go back and actually ask Brian, but I think it was 12 or 13. I'm losing track of time. It's actually probably 12, but I consider being the next chair of the board of Denver Botanic Gardens. And we were sitting, I will never forget this, sitting in Brian's office, because I said yes. And I was getting my orientation to the, sort of what was involved in the chair work and how Brian and I would work together. And after we did all the transactional nuts and bolts stuff, he looked up and he asked me this question that I've never been asked, but it was just a beautiful question because I didn't see it coming. What are your dreams? He said. And it was right. What are your dreams for the garden? And so, it was weird being on, I will candidly tell you, being on Denver Botanic Gardens board at the beginning, because I had this sort of notion of what botanic gardens were. And honestly looked at it as, sort of ladies who lunch, and certainly the mommy brigade, the strollers, a sense of it was for them and not for people who looked like me, even though, I was a physician and doing what I do. And our organization was a wonderful supporter of the gardens. And I've been on the board for a couple of years, but there's still this sort of sense, which is part of just the walk that people of color or people of difference will do their whole lives. And I don't mean it to sound like a victim or to be, oh, poor me. And that is that we always feel like an outsider. And until the country, the world changes and we stop being so darn tribal, that's just sort of part of the walk. So, but the thing about the gardens that was weird is I felt like I did stick out like a sore thumb. Our board was not particularly diverse. It was okay. But I certainly was the different one, and could even remember in early board meetings sitting here thinking, is this really how I'm supposed to be spending my time as a vice president at Kaiser Permanente at the time? And so he asked me that question, and I looked up at him and I said to him, Brian, I want this to be a garden for all people. I said, there is something incredible that happens when I'm out in nature, whether I'm walking or biking, or when I have the chance to walk around this beautiful place in terms of what it feeds and how nourishing from a spiritual, but also a physical and a cognitive and a mental space being in places. And everybody deserves access to this. Everybody does. Now, here's the thing, and this is what allyship, it's a long way of answering the question, what does allyship involve? You have to have, just like you need grand and wonderful soil to germinate great seeds and grow healthy plants, regardless of where they come from around this planet, this beautiful planet, you've got to have sort of this substrate, this, as I say, rich, enriched soil, to use the metaphor, in order for those seeds to germinate. Denver Botanic Gardens had that. They had it not just in Bryant, but they had it in the team. They actually had it in a number of board members. They actually had it in their mission, because one of the pillars of the vision, the strategic plan at that point, was this notion of diversity and biodiversity, but other sorts of diversity too. And so when, when sort of given that sort of wish or dream, I mean, it's so funny. I don't feel like I had to do much of anything, if anything. In fact, I feel like I didn't do very much. But his team was like, yeah, let's do it. And Brian was like, yeah, let's do it. And the board was like, yeah, let's do it. And to watch what has happened, the transformation of who's in that garden and who's walking around, to see people in wheelchairs, to see how the gardens has approached, even in a grander way, accessibility, to see people from all sorts of cultures, the outreach, the inreach into very different communities, and how might we, just asking that question, how might we include other people? And back to that thing I asked earlier about, one of the things that people ought to do early in this work is, how might your mission be better served if you think about it through the lens of inclusivity? For a host of reasons, this only being one of them. The membership at that gardens in the last few years, holy cow, the faces and the difference that you see around there, my goodness, the kinds of plants and sort of the work that they were already and have done for so long under leadership, leadership at the top, middle, and bottom, in terms of how we bring access to other sorts of cultures and other sorts of flora around the world, has just been a remarkable thing to watch. So in a funny way, even though you may think of, and people talk about this allyship as, quote, I stand with you, which was a phrase, frankly, last year that I heard a bit too much while I was crying over what was happening in our streets. But I think that's real allyship, is where I see the beauty of this. I see how, I see both the business case for thinking about this, but I also see the case for humanity by thinking about it. So it's a long way of sort of tooting the horn of an amazing friend and leader, but also just the beauty of being, just even inviting the conversation, not knowing what's on the other side of it when you ask somebody a question like, what are your dreams? So imagine asking that of every one of your employees. Imagine asking that of your friends who are different. Imagine asking that of your leadership, asking that of yourself. Anyway, I think I was preaching. Was that right, Thomas?
Amen. Or
Yeah,
our
we're
lady. As 3000 was our lady. Gender open here. Yes. Wow. No. Okay. So thank you, Doc. I'll say it like this.
And just sorry to interrupt you, Thomas, because I do want to make sure we get to a couple of questions, but it's 12:33. We've got a little over 10 minutes, but I definitely want to give you this voice to be able to talk about what allyship means to you. Just wanted to do a time check real quick.
No problem. Oh, I'll make it in statements. 1, see me as you see you. Don't judge me like you judge you. Do not always try to include yourself in things and make it about you, because it's not. And do not think that when you're not invited, they're not there, that you may not need to be there. Some things are not for you. You know, it's just like the ignorant men who got mad that women wanted to go see Wonder Woman when it came out and booked out one theater in the whole place. And I'm like, what? Did you want to watch the movie? Then shut up. Like, go see it with your fellas, okay? Don't just do things to make yourself feel better. Make the change about others as well. Equity is people, others getting what they need. Fairness is you experiencing some of the discomfort and victories others go. 2 more points. Make your progress about a community and not just about a person. We live in a society and a world that is sick with celebrating people. That's why I don't look up to people, and let alone don't look up to celebrities. And then lastly, I love what you said about stand with me. So if you're gonna stand with me, then sit with me. That's when I really see if you are an advocate. Because when people are standing, usually we're either getting ready to fight or we're running, but when we're sitting, we're usually talking. So I want you to take, when we learn about this kind of stuff, inconvenience yourself for a change and sit with me and learn. United said, we don't have any time. You got plenty. You got time to do whatever you want to do. Sit down, be quiet, and learn. Or sit down, ask a question, and then be quiet. So those are my tips. I'm done.
Oh, you're on fire. That was fantastic. All right. Well, we're about to do a little bit more rapid fire. It doesn't have to be that way, because I want you to be able to speak to these, because I think there's some great questions. The first one, it seems a lot of popularity in this question, and there's actually another person who made this as well. So I'm going to combine them. It says, how can we help with, quote, pipeline work, especially with boards and leadership pushing for charging for all programming? Another one is like pipeline problems. I think BIPOC folks getting just internships, but not more, or, leaky pipeline. So everything is about this kind of a pipeline. It seems to breed just and creates a bit of a hostile environment is what I'm hearing. And, people getting pushed out. So they either fit into this pipeline or they don't. And that there's a conversations around that.
Mm-hmm.
Can I do something real quick then before you ask? Can I demonstrate something? Now, I'll just try to. I hope I don't misrepresent it. Dr. Allen-Davis, can I ask you, can I defer to you? Because I know you sit on a number of boards, okay? I've only sat on 10, but you sit on them and lead. So I just want to ask you, could I learn from you and listen to you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You better.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
She's like,
You best call me, email me. I'd love to. So let me just answer and actually there's some real beauty in terms of even Thomas, what you just said. I'll make this very quick. Yesterday I went out to Roxborough State Park and took a walk with a friend. As I'm walking back to my car, there was a group of kids, all little white kids, probably at camp, who they were going, I guess, getting ready to go. They were absolutely getting ready to take a walk at the park. And they were all clustered around, there are these, in fact, I stopped when I saw them in the park. Oh, look, there's a caterpillar, these little caterpillars. And to hear this, their curiosity and their interest in this little caterpillar was just so cool. And to hear this, one of the leaders, the teacher saying, remember, we're respectful of nature, and blah, sort of talking to let's not, you don't touch it, blah, blah, blah. And I found myself thinking, kids are innately curious. Humans are innately curious, and they want to learn. Our pipeline issue is that we don't respect that the way people learn is through the opportunity to have access to lots of different ways of doing and being. And as opposed to sitting in a classroom, and not that you shouldn't sit in the classroom, and not that there aren't some absolute sort of table stakes things that people should be learning. But there are so many different ways that people learn, and part of it is accessibility. Physical therapy, I'm going to take my little example. PT, occupational therapy, speech language pathology, largely female and overwhelmingly white. Overwhelmingly white specialties or professions. When people think about healthcare, they don't think about those. They think about doctors and nurses. And what we are not doing is widening, back to my phrase earlier, the aperture and the vistas to let kids know what is possible out there. So I think this pipeline issue is in part because as long as you keep doing things the way you've always done them, you're always going to get what you always got. And right now, we don't think the pipeline is actually, there's still a pretty cool and very rigid backroom boys club around how people get access to jobs. And you wonder why you don't have this. So it really is, it truly is a cradle to grave issue. And we've got to expose people to careers in, you know, what all goes into making a garden beautiful in terms of, again, this thing, as opposed to, I have no idea what people, if you had to ask kids who works in gardens or what do you think are the specialties that are needed, they would know. Or when's the last time any of you actually took kids of color to a garden? I remember taking some, I was doing some youth mentoring a few years ago and watching these little girls run around botanic gardens. I am convinced they were teenage girls, hard as they come in terms of toughness, who just were squealing with delight at the bees and love the flower. I mean, it's like you're opening it's an opening of eyes in a way that we need to do a hell of a lot more of, in addition to strengthening our schools. But it's exposure to other things that the privileged already, just like watching that caterpillar, you know, get to do, just as it's just their life. I mean, it's bringing that sort of privilege to the pipeline, but with intentionality on every single organization. How do you do it?
So I think that this next question really is a great follow-up to that, right? Which is then how do you address organizations that use this barrier of, well, no people of color applied for this position and no people of color were qualified for this position. How do you address that?
Thomas, I'm gonna let you start because
I was ready to defer again, doctor. I'm like, hey, I'm good. Let's see. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So I've dealt with that a number of ways. When I hear the statements, we didn't have any people of color. You know, it's a typical thing. I always say, okay, well, where did you promote the job? Where did you put it? How long has it been out? You know. Then I asked the next real question. And I say it like this: when my last team came to NC State, first thing they said when they came in was, yeah, we just need to go to high schools and set up and then do that. And then I looked at them and said, we were doing that before you came here and it doesn't work. So can we try this other thing? And sadly, they didn't want to. You know, they wanted to stick what was in their head. And I'm like, so first thing I want to say is, well, then if you don't do it, please don't challenge it. So they didn't do it. I'm like, I'm the one recruiting, listen to me. So I said all that to say this: who did you call? If you think that you can just send something out and that's it, that's like academics just standing up in front of people saying, oh yeah, they're going to come here to this school. If you just send it out and then you're just waiting. Then the next question I have, before COVID and now after with vaccines and everything, where did you go? So if all they did was send it out and wait, now that goes to what Doc mentioned earlier, accessibility and people having access to it. Well, everybody may not know how to find it. Everyone may not know how to get to it. And then by the time they apply, the deadlines come, and it's not always because they're late. It's because, oh, I didn't see it. I didn't know. So all of those questions that I just asked, that's for people who are trying to hire to think about the recruitment. What other steps are you taking to bring people in? Okay. How long did you call? Where'd you put it? All right. What are you looking for?
And I will tell you that it's also something that leadership has to own. And not just, it can't be relegated simply to HR. I was thinking about this last year and thinking, wait a minute, I think given, this is going to sound some way I don't mean it to, but I was being snarky. And I said, I think given your title, you could call the presidents of any historically Black college or university in this country to talk about the problem of SLP and OT and PT. Because there are schools, there are absolutely programs in the HBCUs for each of these. And I think if you call the president and say, we want to figure out some way to have your students come and start doing internships in our hospital, I think they take your phone call, Jandel. And so that's the other thing. You got to fish in different ponds than you're used to. And you sure can't do we did exactly what you're saying, but it's a more active and intentional look. And it also starts with recognizing you have a problem. I mean, some of the reason we do what we do, which is just post it in the usual place and wonder why you get what you get, is because you're not really interested in changing, sort of the paradigm. So I think that that's what we did. I asked our VP who does this, has all the therapies, to say, let's look at the HBCUs across the country and see who has physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech language pathology, psych programs, et cetera. And we've got housing. We can figure this out for students to come out from around. If this is something that we're truly committed to, you got to invest time, talent, and treasure in terms of changing the paradigm. So we're starting that part of the journey. That's how you do pipeline. But exposing high school kids to what goes on, exposing middle school kids to thinking in my space around healthcare, around what are all the careers that are possible, because they just think doctors, nurses, and sometimes that can seem so unattainable. That you don't even necessarily think about all the others. And by the way, a number of those doors are ways into other professions in other specialties within healthcare. So that's how I think about it.
So I think this next question also ties into this. I love this. So all of you who are throwing your questions, you are so on point and you're picking up on the themes, right? So this whole pipeline issue, and we talk about exposing people, to these types of careers and opportunities, but this is the biggest challenge that I have been trying to convey and talk about in my own leadership journey and my process of changing careers from one that was very lucrative to one that is not known for being lucrative at all. And this is that our salaries are really, really low, that you have to be a privilege to work in a garden.
Mhm.
And so the people that are there either are getting government assistance if they are, or if they're a single parent, if they're not a person of privilege, right? They're really being kind of held in this really, I feel like, dehumanizing way by our salaries, right? So, there's a whole sense of then being able to do what we love, but also that it's our worth, being compensated for our worth. And so how do we address this? I mean, what are some of these some ideas that you might have?
Now, just real quick, unfortunately, I have another talk that I have to jump on, and I don't want to leave because I want to absorb more wisdom from Doc here, to be real with you. I'm sincere about that. So I'd love to get your contact, Doc, for real. But I would, if I can just, start this. So, because I tell people when I talk to foresters in particular, and they say, oh yeah, they got to get accustomed to starting at this and that, the bottom. And I say, you got to be careful how you say that. You keep saying you want folks of color. I was like, so you want us to come in and a lot of us have been poor and they were supposed to come and work for what some may say is nothing. And then others may say, oh my goodness, you should be happy with that. So one thing that I say is that we have to recognize that we're dealing with different generations and that one career may not work for a person anymore. People may have to do a couple of different careers. I mean, I basically work 3 jobs. I'm a dean, I'm a CEO, and I'm a diversity professional. You know what I'm saying? Like I do all of those. And then I say, if you're not going to pay me what I'd like to make or what I need to make, then can we make some space for me to do other things? Since I'm not just my job, I have other skills. So I just want to encourage whoever leading and working and dealing with the hiring to really consider that, because if you're not paying money, then why are we sitting here talking about how to bring people here anyway? Because people are going to want that. They want to change their life circumstances. They want to improve and enhance things. Now I'll say this because now I'm about to put my ignorance on display. I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't know everything, but I also know that all gardens don't operate the same way. Because I know, like, if you work in the greenhouse at the Biltmore Estate, your pay may be different than working at a botanical garden, in Durham or in Charlotte. So I also think that we may want to also consider the structures of the gardens and how do we get, I know every garden can be the same because I'm about diversity, but how do we get what is happening on these really expensive lands to happen in these gardens? And I don't know, maybe that's talking to the people who really love gardening and who give the money to the gardens to do something different, whether that's government, whether that's millionaires or billionaires. But to me, this conversation sounds like people who have money need to be accessed and need to be talked to in this. And I'm not going to even say, let's make people of color okay with minimal pay like everybody else, because you can't do me like that. Like, if you're going to bring me in, I don't work for free. You better pay me. And if you really want to make this equal and talk about the EI, then you should start from there, and you should start right there. instead of just, oh, let's bring them in and then work. Nah, I don't do free work. Slaves did that. The people who built the railroads did that. The people who rebuilding the country now are doing that. And my mother and father fought for civil rights. So I'm not asking, and I'm not doing that. And that's the thing that I really want to put out there to people. And if you want to really bring people in, then get past this whole, oh yeah, they should be good with this. I'm good with it. I'm not you.
Yeah. I think that's the case for all people, regardless of what they look like. But we know we've got pay inequities all over the damn place. And I actually think some of that, sadly, has to be and is being solved through policy. That is through the courts and through the legislatures to make sure that pay equity, whether it's gender pay or other pay equity, needs to happen. At the same time, what I'm hearing is a universal around what the salaries are like in public gardens or any gardens in general. And there's this thing that comes up from time to time that you should just be so happy to work here. So you should be happy to settle for, you get to be out, you're doing this sort of things. This is real work, and heaven knows it's work that the planet needs, given how we're watching, more and more species, whether it's plants or animals, go extinct. This is work that's of value, and it's worth an overhaul of all salaries, all salary bands is what I'd say if you are sort of seeing it that way. But the other is to remember it's salary, wages, and benefits. And I'd wonder, under the topic of benefits, in particular for entry-level workers, is there something different we ought to be doing around tuition reimbursement that's meaningful, right? And don't even call it reimbursement, because that means the way those programs typically work, you have to finish the course before we're going to pay for it as an employer. But the other way is to say, we will send you to college. We will send you for further training, education, whatever, and tie it to advancement within the organization, because it's those sorts of things that are they don't necessarily put food on a table. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. And I suspect there's a way that you can meet in the middle if we could do this. I know gardens, I think, but maybe, okay, this is me about to take a long walk off a short plank. I suspect you don't work off of hefty profit margins as the corporate sector or the for-profit sector would. So the profit margins aren't huge, but I will tell you, this sort of investment in people that ends up retaining people and allowing you to recruit from among the best, or certainly the betters, are the kinds of things that where you're paying now, or you're going to pay later, but pay you well. So if you're not willing to sort of think about that investment in people in terms of how folks are paid, salary, wages, and benefits, the whole package, then you're going to pay for it in turnover costs. Trust me, you're paying for it in turnover costs. You're not, and that's something that we don't even pay enough attention to in healthcare or anywhere else when we start talking this way. And I believe you should pay people fairly. So.
Thank you both so much. I know we've gone a little over time, but I know we also started a little late. And
my fault. So
no, not at all.
I couldn't get
it's
on.
okay. We've all been through this in the last year. It's just been so challenging. But thank you so much. And I mean, for that last statement, it's something that I have been sitting with just because I think about it in fairness, but I also look at where the root of some of the beliefs are. And I have to throw this in because I think this is worth hearing. It's that we live in a value-driven society, not an ideological one in some sense, yet we want to operate from an ideological place that says, hey, free is welcoming, but it does not actually mean welcoming, and that we have an associated value with nature, with the work that we do. There is a value to plants. There is a value to that mental health and that work. And so when a lot of the conversation starts steering away from having a fee or charging things, and it's because I think sometimes we're also looking at it in a shameful way, this kind of looking down on the nonprofit world, and that here we're serving humanity, that there is a very deep-seated history in the philanthropy, right? That it comes from a place of privilege given to those that have nots. And we need to start changing how we think about that completely. And so I think that is a question, is how do we actually voice the value in what we do, and then the people who are doing this work. We're not just selling you entertainment. We're selling you health and well-being. You're
and wellness.
selling healthcare and equity to our staff. I think that there's a lot of conversation with this. I could get on a soapbox, but I'm not going to because I'm going to get booted off the stage here.
I will only say one thing: no margin, no mission.
Yeah.
No margin, no mission. And I think you do have to charge what your work is worth and be unashamed about it. You don't want to be ridiculous because it is an accessibility issue. But do remember, without a margin, you can't feed your mission. And I actually think the virtuous cycle is also no mission, no margin. So they work together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, Thomas, Jandel, it's been truly a pleasure. I have learned so much, and I'm sure that many are, and I know we could probably do this for another hour and with all the fantastic questions. So what I would say to those that posted questions that we weren't able to answer, please post them on the forum and the IDEA committee page out on the APGA. It is there for you to share what you learn, to share with others. This is how we connect with one another. This is how we keep the conversation going. This is how we keep talking. So let's do that. Thank you again. We have another Idea Cafe. This is not just a once a year thing. We decided to, hey, we need to keep going. So we do this every quarter. So you can see when we have the next one coming up on the, again, on the Idea Committee page, the APGA. So September is when the next one will come out. So we want to hear from you about what we need to be talking about and the questions that you have. And that is how we got to today, is because of all of the wonderful questions and the topics that you all have been asking for. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Thomas and Jandel. Thank you, Idea Committee.
Thank you for the
everyone.
opportunity to share. Thank you.
Much gratitude.
Have a great
Thank you so
afternoon.
much.
Thomas, email me.
I will, Doc. I will.
All right, folks, take care.
All right, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.